Hey everyone, hedging, or speaking out both sides of your mouth at the same time, in terms of political rhetoric, just assures that you can always pretend that you were right all along, or in the know, so to speak. Headline out of the National Post: I don't think Canada will be the great exception to populist disruption, expert says. The electorate is now more polarized on cultural issues than it's ever been in Canada. We'll have to see where that goes, Eric Kaufman said. Don't you just love when they use the term expert? Yeah, that's political speak for forget about everything you've heard from anyone else. This is your ultimate authority. And the moment I see that happening or being presented to me is the minute I'm saying I'm looking elsewhere. I want to see what other people are saying that aren't the so-called expert as presented by our thought leaders. And you should too if you want to be truly informed. It's being reported by Stuart Thompson, July 19th, 2019. Canada has so far managed to avoid the populist disruptions seen in other Western democracies, but the social fabric tying the country together may be starting to fray, a leading expert on the issue said. What makes this person, I just got to bring up, what makes this person an expert? Please, pray tell. Like I say, that word gets tossed around much too freely these days. In his book, White Shift, political scientist Eric Kaufman described Canada as a possible exception to the populist wave in the West. But in a recent interview with economist Tyler Cowen, Kaufman said the precarious status quo is now under threat. The idea that English Canada is immune to this is actually wrong, and I do think we're going to see more of it going forward, Kaufman said. The electorate is now more polarized on cultural issues than it's ever been in Canada. We'll have to see where that goes, but I don't think Canada will be the great exception it has been for much longer. I mean, come on. Is this guy going to bring up the fact that, hey, why would that be the case? Why would you think that Canadians are exceptional in some way? I mean, think about it. If people on the right side of the political spectrum or the political aisle were suggesting that Canadians were exceptional in comparison to contrast to everyone else in the world, well, the accusations of white supremacy would be bannered about and tossed around in articles even such as this to push back against it. But once again, it depends on where you come from in terms of the political divide in this country. That's on glaringly obvious display, not just in this article, but many others as well. But before I continue on reading this article, I just want to point out the main reason why Canadians are seemingly late to the game as far as populism goes, or pushing back against the ruling elite or the authoritarian collectivists in this country, is because they've been woefully and inadequately informed by the political and media establishment in this country. But yeah, have no fear. Social media proponents and content creators like myself are stepping up to provide the Canadian people with the information needed with a reflection of genuine reality. And yeah, of course that's playing a role on getting more and more of the Canadian population on board with supporting anyone that's willing to challenge the status quo or the ruling establishment. Those who represent or align with the ruling establishment, they won't tell you that, but I will. As evidence of this, Kaufman pointed to the newly founded People's Party of Canada, which advocates for reduced immigration levels, and Doug Ford's progressive conservative government in Ontario, which he said has elements of this populism. Ford's government, though, has mainly steered clear of the immigration issue, except for a brief spat with the federal government over funding for resettling asylum seekers who had crossed the border illegally. At least it's nice to see someone using the word properly. Yeah, illegal border crossing, not irregular. Neither the federal Conservatives or Ford's PC government have called for a reduction in the amount of legal immigrants that Canada accepts each year. Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, has called for a reduction in the number of immigrants allowed into Canada from 310,000 to 250,000. The current Liberal government hopes to boost the number to 350,000 by 2021. On Cowen's podcast, Kaufman said he'd also noticed recent polling that shows support for immigration isn't changing much in Canada, but that it is hardening along partisan lines. Immigration attitudes are now very different depending if you're a Conservative or Liberal voter. That didn't used to be the case even 5 years ago. So there's more of a politicization of that issue now, he said. A recent poll by Egos found that nearly 70% of Conservatives surveyed believe that there are too many visible minorities among immigrants, while only 15% of Liberals agreed with that sentiment. Just 5 years ago, The same poll showed 47% of conservatives in agreement, alongside 34% of liberals. In his book, which grapples with the end of white majorities in Western societies, Kaufman devoted a chapter to Canadian exceptionalism, trying to explain why the country has managed to avoid a populist backlash despite high levels of immigration. So his book, which grapples with the end of white majorities, you're going to become, the book references the fact that if you're white, you're going to become a minority in what you would perceive as your country, or a country based and built upon your kind or your people. And apparently he seems oblivious to the fact that, geez, you think that might play a role in this ramp up of populism, of more and more Canadians, of those white Canadians, which still represent a majority of the population of this country? Do you think that might have anything to do with the fact that there is now this rise of populism in Canada? That's the thing with these people. Like I say, when you're talking out both sides of your mouth at the same time, this is what you end up getting for rhetoric. And once again, like I say, the fact that Kaufman devotes a chapter to Canadian exceptionalism. What about Canada or Canadians is this Kaufman character suggestion that makes them exceptional in some way? And doesn't that seem very elitist? Very supremacist in nature? Kaufman argues that there is an elite consensus in Canada about multiculturalism and anti-racism that makes many populist ideas taboo. For example, when Kelly Leitch ran for leader of the Conservative Party on a plan to screen immigrants for Canadian values, she was overly branded as racist by pundits and rivals. People will start to resent this suppression only when there is a breach of etiquette by a successful populist politician, which pulls the center-right across a norm boundary, wrote Kaufman. In English Canada, the poll by Ecos found about 40% of people think there are too many visible minorities in their communities, but the difference is there are no political vehicles channeling this at the federal level, Kaufman wrote. Taboos are particularly effective at enforcing moral norms because people act not only on their own beliefs, but from perceptions of what others think is correct, he wrote. This helps explain why anonymous polling on immigration tends to show more negative results and why norm-breaking politicians like Donald Trump can sometimes inspire what seems like a spontaneous wave of support. Kaufman takes care to differentiate between Quebec and English Canada and argues that François Legault, Coalition Avenir Quebec, which was elected on an immigration reduction platform, fits the profile of a populist right party. The difference, Kaufman argues, is that English Canada's historical lack of identity has been replaced with multiculturalism, while Quebec has always maintained a distinct culture. Where Quebec identity is territorial, historical, and cultural, the contemporary Anglo-defined Canadian identity is futuristic, a missionary nationalism centered on the left modernist ideology of multiculturalism, wrote Kaufman. Although English-speaking Canadians and Quebecers share similar sentiments on issues that have traditionally been embraced by populist parties, for example, on banning the burqa, Kaufman argued that the distinct elite forms of English Canada account for the difference in mainstream support. As long as there is no system breach, English Canada may be able to repress criticism of multiculturalism and mass immigration indefinitely, Kaufman wrote in his book, published in late 2018. Since then, he fears the system may already have been breached. Once again, hedging. Wishful thinking on probably the former aspect of his predictions, and an actual recognition of reality on the other side of it, or on the back end. Like I say, folks, the minute you hear someone in the media, especially if it's from any portion of the established media, reference someone as an expert, that's a pretty good sign. That's a key word that should not only raise the alarm bells, but make you want to be even more steadfast in your approach as far as being properly informed and getting information from alternative sources. Because like I say, that's political rhetoric meant to have one purpose in mind, and that's to supplant the idea in your mind that this is the person that knows a whole lot more than you or anyone else, so you better agree with them or be ready to be lambasted or accused of being a knuckle dragger or someone who's uneducated or, a blue-collar worker. Like I say, folks, these elitists seem to be projecting while at the same time somewhat recognizing that big wall of reality that's ever encroached upon them and hedging the rhetoric so as not to be proven to be completely out of touch and wrong at some point in time in the future. How well that's going to work? Well, that completely depends on our ability to get alternative media, information, and sources out there that challenges the status quo. I'm doing my part. Are you doing yours? It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.